I am deep in the jungle in Peru, in the Amazon, and I'm drinking ayahuasca. It's the second day of a retreat, and I am writhing in pain, just sheer agony. And the ayahuasca has taken away my words. I can't speak to anybody, can't really formulate thoughts. All I can feel is this intense pain. And I really want it to stop. But it just goes on. And then starts to subside. And slowly I go through what feels like a little I slowly go through what feels like a literal rebirth into the world, and I'm given my words back. And then the ayahuasca explains to me what I had just gone through. I had shed years and years, including past life, years and years of pain, emotional baggage, suffering that I was holding on to. And then the ayahuasca starts to talk to me about emotions, about how they work. The very first lesson that Mother Ayahuasca says is that pain is information. I'm going to explain what that means. But after my experience that night, when I saw the shamans the next day, they said, "You look like a brand new spiritual child. You had shed eons upon eons of emotional baggage." And in the years after that, my guides continued to develop my understanding of the relationship between emotion, time, and language, and why our emotions are central to our spiritual growth. So much so that emotions are the first chapter of my book, available on Amazon. Shameless plug. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the misunderstandings that we have around emotion, what it means to let go for real, because we often get this wrong. And then we're going to look at two of the biggest pitfalls to avoid when you're dealing with your emotions as part of your spiritual path. Now, why start with emotions? Why not start with spirit guides or intuition or the chakras? We start with emotions because these are the entry point, the portal to your relationship with all that is. They're the centerpiece. Right now, you are feeling a multitude of emotions. Your emotions are fluctuating from moment to moment, here and there. And if you were to sit and really tap into what you're feeling, your emotions are like ping pong all over the place. Boom, 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 boom. What everyone on the spiritual path aspires to is a state of balance, of peace, joy, bliss. You don't want to feel worried, sad, angry, full of shame, whatever the negative emotions that might be also coursing through you right now. And that is one of the first things that all humans, we all have to contend with, which is that we run from pain towards pleasure. Our primary response to emotion is to avoid it, numb it, escape it. And if we can't quite do that, we learn to dramatize it. We learn to react and spew it out in the world. And so you have people, and I was this way, who are very much about suppressing their emotions, about being stoic, looking serene, and beneath it, it's choppy waters. Or we become drama queens, exhausting to be around. You are feeling a multitude of emotions, even in this moment watching this video. Those emotions might include curiosity. They might be boredom. You're like, I'm already ready to move on. You might be like, wow, this is the most handsome guy ever on YouTube. And I'm like, I know. Whatever you're feeling, you are going to fluctuate. And you're looking for peace, pleasure on the one side and moving away from discomfort, boredom, angst on the other. So whatever you're feeling right now, you can identify that. You could start to put that into words. I am feeling it, and then we label it, we characterize it. We have a language around emotions. When we talk about letting go, one of the first things that we have to learn to do is actually to let go, first and foremost, of our mind's reaction, including even labeling. To start, we want to just feel. We want to just feel, because if pain is information, very often we're trying to translate that. into language, into story. We want to give it meaning. And we actually need to suspend our mental relationship to our emotion as an initial step. Our emotions are first and foremost a language, but they're a language of sensation. We want to avoid the effort to translate them into labels and stories and just feel the sensations in our body. Simply experience the emotional energy as it moves through us. We're, in that sense, like a tuning fork, feeling in a particular way. And we can put that into language for a moment. I'll put that into language that our emotions can feel heavy, they can feel itchy, they can feel hot, they can feel cold, they can feel electric, they can be located in certain places in the body. And all of that generally stirs up a mental machinery. So we want to start simply by feeling. And this is where we start to tap into some misconceptions. So one of the deeply rooted misconceptions is that if we feel our emotions, if we let them in, they're going to overwhelm us or we're going to attract something in response. And they're not. Our feelings are not to be avoided. They're not a sign of failure. They're not an indication that we are out of control. Now, that's not to deny that emotions should be touched gently. Sometimes they can be incredibly powerful, and we have to learn to touch them slowly, carefully, because it's a really important key to healing our emotions. I grew up in a home where it was not safe to express emotion. If you expressed emotion, there was no space to hold it. Everyone retreated from it. So I learned to process on my own. And that meant not sharing my emotions with others because I was anticipating an avoidant response. I had to learn not only that I had this tendency to hide and mask my emotions to process them later, but that these were then a barrier to human connection. And so a big part of my and what has been amazing about becoming somebody who reads people for a living is that almost all of my work is about emotional energy. Another reason that feeling our emotions is really important, and again, just to emphasize, I'm talking about feeling, not expressing, not screaming, not spewing them on others, simply feeling them, is that they're really deeply connected to our physical well-being. When we suppress our emotions, they will come out in physical ways. The sensations that you don't allow yourself to feel now will eventually come out as the body begins to break down in some way. And whether that is anger leading to heartache, which scientists have recently found there is a connection, or unprocessed emotions showing up as digestive problems, breakdowns in muscle tissue. This shows up in a lot of ways. The emotions that you don't express will inevitably translate in one way or another to physical symptoms so that they will be felt. It is the way in which your body forces you to feel what it is containing. Whatever you resist persists, accept that your path involves feeling your emotions really deeply. And now that's going to lead us to the first step of what it means to let go and why letting go is actually a bit of a misnomer. It tends to lead us astray. So, how do you let go of painful emotions? With almost everyone that I talk to about letting go, what I find is that there is still a tendency to treat people think that they're letting go and they're turning away from the emotion. And they're very often turning very quickly to a story about the emotion, what the emotion means. They're engaged in analysis. And the letting go is like a turning away, it's a backing off of. And that's a version of what we all know how to do. We all know how to push our emotions away, numb them, avoid them. What letting go means, first of all, particularly for those of us who are really skilled at avoiding our emotions, is letting go of our resistance to the emotion. It's allowing it to wash through you. It's allowing it to just flow. Sadness, depression, sadness, anger, frustration, resentment, whatever it is, allowing it to be there. And that word, allow, is something of a mantra when I'm feeling emotions, just allowing it. Where does it want to go? Often it starts to feel much more intense because you're letting yourself be present to it. You're letting yourself feel and hear in the language of sensation that emotion instead of pushing it away. And when we feel these emotions, it's very normal for us to feel resistant, sort of clench, tighten, and just start to push it away, or at least keep it at bay. And you have to learn when an emotion will be overwhelming, particularly with very intense traumas. Those are the places where you want to exercise a lot of care. But if we're talking about just being annoyed, upset, a little bit miffed, somebody, or I'm just disappointed, those sorts of emotions, where you know that they're not tied to a very deep and profound wound, just feeling it. What does that feel like? Oh, disappointment, anger, sadness, regret. We feel these things all the time, but we push them away. Start by recognizing the ways in which you clench and tighten and allow yourself to soften. Allow yourself to soften. Relax, feel it, and then notice where you're pushing away and then soften again. You're going to practice over and over what it feels like simply to feel. And you're going to notice that if your mind starts running off to the races, beginning to analyze, oh, what is this? Oh, this reminded me of this. Oh, I think it's related to this. What does it mean? None of that. You're just going to keep coming back to the body and allowing and asking yourself, what does this feel like? That's as much mental activity as you want. And that is letting go. Letting that wave upon wave of emotion to move through you and to move through you. That's the second half of the letting go. The part that everyone thinks that they're doing already is when it truly evaporates on its own or subsides. Didn't push it away and you didn't grab onto it and then dramatize. Because of those two poles where we either tend to suppress and numb, or we tend to express and dramatize and become drama queens with our emotions, sort of demanding people to agree with us. We talk about it, we buy in, we take action, we speak, we do all sorts of unskillful things with overwhelming emotion when we've identified with it and we don't let it go. So that second piece is just to let it feel, and when it subsides, it subsides. Now, this is just the first step in a deeper process, but it's an important one. It's an important one because you are embodying with this practice what it means to be present and accept yourself just as you are in the moment. Accepting this emotion, not demanding of it, not questioning it, not judging yourself for it, not judging it, just simply accepting. And in that way, it's a very loving and compassionate practice to simply allow the emotion in your body to come up, for you to experience it, and then it goes. And when you do that, you're also learning a really important paradox about life, which is that we often want to change and we want to be different people. So we want to not be an angry person, or we don't want to be sad, or we want this pain that we felt our entire lives to go away. So we want to be different. There's a desire there. And ironically, we don't actually heal this by forcing ourselves to become different. We change when we accept ourselves just as we are. That's the change that you need, is learning acceptance. So allowing yourself these emotions, you're actually undergoing a massive change in how you normally process them. Now, when do we get back to story? When do we get back to language and meaning and interpretation? Those are important steps. And in a future video, I'm going to talk about what we do next. All we're focusing on right now, the most important one, because this is the piece that anyone that I've ever worked with comes back to me, has not learned to feel their emotions, says, I never understood. This is what it means to let go. I've always analyzed and sort of justified and engaged in mental activity, and realizing that there's so much power in just feeling. It's also important because very often we're sophisticated in how we relate to emotion. So what's the next step? Before we get to story, before we get to analysis, there's something else that we need to do first. I'll give you a story. At some point during the pandemic, I became very depressed. I was feeling this emotion and I was using all of the other tools in my toolkit, and I just had to feel this emotion again and again. It would not budge and it wouldn't allow me to move to interpretation, any other kind of tool, energy work, breath, mantra. None of it seemed to move this. So I kept going back to step one. I just kept feeling it over, and it would subside, and I would feel it, and it would subside. And that's the first lesson, is that very often these things have to be held. These things have to be felt, not once, not twice, not even 10 times. They might have to be felt 100 times, over and over. Even when you've gone through all the steps, sometimes you just have to go back to feeling and being with it and being really uncomfortable with the fact that you're still feeling this. Coming back to that feeling of, why has this not been healed? And that's an important recognition, because when you have that moment of like, why is this still here? You're back in resistance. You're back in a state where you secretly want this to go away, and you're no longer in a state of acceptance, and you're no longer loving and being compassionate toward this emotion. And you have to be compassionate with yourself for having fallen out of compassion for yourself and having fallen back into resistance. You can't judge yourself for that either, because there's another paradox. You know me, I love my paradoxes. A fundamental paradox of being human is that you are whole and still healing all at once. And when you are meeting your emotions compassionately, lovingly, with acceptance, with allowance, that is when you are whole. Your wholeness is the ability to meet that emotion and simply be with it. That is also, by the way, for those of you who are worried about emotions and emotional energy and feeling like, oh, if I allow this, it's going to be a magnet. If I feel this anger, it's still going to pull anger towards me. If I feel a lot of sadness, that's going to manifest something. The so-called vibrational frequency of that feeling, that's not what you need to worry about. What you're actually worrying about is the vibrational frequency of how you meet that emotion. So your acceptance is the frequency that you need to be worrying about, the vibe that you need to be worrying about. And so when we do that, what we're doing is not only giving that space for that emotion, for that pain point in our lives to be held, seen, accepted, we are also strengthening our capacity to be present to painful emotions, to be loving. We're deepening our connection with the part of us that is whole, the part of us that is divine, the part of us is capable of unconditional love. And that is why feeling our emotions is such a powerful practice, because not only are we healing those emotions, whatever wounds they are, that we haven't even identified yet, because all we're doing is feeling them, and we are expanding our capacity to be with the discomfort, to be with those painful things. We are deepening our capacity to love ourselves. And so this practice does both, shows you that you're whole and you're still healing all at once. And that's why it's so important. And so remember that every time you feel something and you fall back into resistance, you say, why am I not healed yet? That's when you are splintering yourself again. That is when you are falling out of acceptance. So how do you deepen, first of all, your capacity to simply feel these emotions, to feel and not go into analysis, to feel and not go into interpretation or get caught up in them and act out? It's a fundamental principle of meditation, of being able to be present to what is happening and not react to it. So for the first step of just being able to feel, you want to practice silent meditation, not guided meditation, although you can use Guided meditation is designed to help you sit in silence, but simply to be with your thoughts, to be with yourself just as you are. That's it. Now, when you're not feeling emotions like this and you're not practicing, how do you deepen your capacity to meet that which is painful or difficult with love and compassion? How do you work with resistance? One of the best tools to do that is metta or loving kindness, where you offer wishes to a beloved figure like a grandmother. May you be happy, may you be healthy, may you feel safe, may you live in peace. You offer those same wishes to yourself, and then you offer them to a neutral person, and then you offer them to a difficult person. And what this practice does is show you how strong your heart is, how strong your mental capacity for being compassionate is. And it's often easiest with somebody that we love very easily, and then we find it difficult for ourselves, and then we find it easier for a neutral person, and then we find it more difficult for somebody with whom we have conflict. But you're training your mind and your heart to open and meet those people. And then when you feel strong emotions, you've strengthened that compassionate side of you. So I highly recommend metta. So until now, I've been talking about emotions as pain points, these very heavy, powerful emotions that are the source of our suffering, and we want to move away from them. We want to get to a place of peace, bliss, happiness. We should also cultivate our capacity for positive emotion. I just hinted at that through the use of metta, where we're expanding our capacity for compassion. And the next thing that often comes to mind for people is gratitude. I love gratitude. It's a wonderful practice of tuning into what you appreciate. What is it that you have already that you are grateful for? And it's powerful because it moves you back into the present and takes you away from what is missing or you're lacking. So I encourage everyone to practice gratitude. But there's actually a even more foundational or fundamental practice. And the reason I say it's more fundamental or foundational has to do with the difficulty, in my experience, that people have with it, which is what brings you joy. Often when I work with people and ask them, what brings you joy? I find that people can struggle. They can sort of sit back and go, well, I kind of like this, or I sort of enjoy that. What is often the case is the things that make you really filled with joy, that bring you enormous joy, or fill you with laughter, or that just you feel so alive when you do them, are hard to list. People struggle to identify them, or if they do identify them, and I ask, how often do you allow yourself this? Or how often do you do this activity? And very often, well, not that often. Sometimes we have responsibilities, we have work, things. Sometimes the expenses of the activities that bring us the most joy are beyond us at the moment. But there's something else that's very often in the way. Let me give you an example. Years ago, I remember reading somebody, a beautiful human being, who I felt this real air of deprivation around, self-deprivation. And this person had a hard time relating to that or identifying it. Then I remember asking about a piano that they had and asked if they liked to play. And this person lit up. Yes, I love playing the piano. And I remember asking, how often do you do it? Oh, never, very rarely. And I was like, why not? And like, well, I'm just not that good. I'm not good enough. Like I could never play in a venue like Carnegie Hall. And I thought, that's not why you're playing piano. Like playing for yourself for the pure pleasure of playing. Something that they didn't allow themselves because there was a limiting belief about how good they were. And that is what I find happens very often with joy, is that we have attached all sorts of requirements to our joys. I have to earn it, I have to deserve it, whatever it is. And that fundamentally is the practice to tap into that side of you. of giving yourself something that makes you feel alive. We're here to experience joy. That is a huge part of the path. And so not only do you need to work on feeling the negative emotions, you also need to practice feeling positive emotions. Cultivating joy is one of the fastest ways to align with your higher self because you know deep down what brings you joy. There are things that bring you joy, and sometimes you might label them guilty pleasures. I don't care. There's no requirement that this be something that you're going to put on social media that you're going to tell everybody about. It can be simple. I've worked with people whose simple pleasure was cooking a certain meal. Do it and do it with abandon. Do it with joy. Do not do it with all of the caveats. If it's food, don't do it with, oh, but the calories. Just enjoy it. Like literally, that's the word, enjoy it. And allow yourself to feel, what does joy feel like in the body? Where do I feel it? What does it feel like? Just notice it. And in that way, you're deepening again that side of you that is whole. That is you and your connection to your higher self, why you're here, anything that makes you feel really alive. And if you're struggling with identifying it, take some time, do some inner contemplation, do some journaling, figure out what is it, the things that really make me happy. They can be very simple. I realized years ago, one of my basic joys, it's a very simple thing, but I love fresh cut flowers. I love beautiful bouquets. So every once in a while, I'm like, there's a beautiful bouquet. I don't saddle myself with the questions, all the things that might get in the way. I buy them, I water them, I enjoy them, I compost them, and I accept that this is one thing that I really do enjoy. So make that list for yourself and then see how much you can give yourself. Pick 1 week, 2 weeks, where you're like, I'm going to make joy my priority and see what happens. Okay. 2 big pitfalls. You're a sophisticated being who has a very strong mind and is capable of doing some things that actually get in your way. And the first is a term that you've heard, I'm sure you've heard, wasn't coined by me, it's made its way now into common parlance. It's bypassing. Yes, bypassing. And it's connected to that first step, the step that I talked about of letting go and everyone wants to avoid. Bypassing is the practice of using spiritual wisdom to avoid dealing with emotional problems. And the way that happens is very often when you feel something and very quickly jump to analysis, intellectualizing, interpretation, and you apply a spiritual tenet like everything happens for a reason, or life is perfect just as it is, or I am going to trust that God is going to take care of this. Whatever it is, you've met this experience of emotion with a mental formulation. And as a result, you actually tamp down that emotion. You might feel a sense of relief. I am feeling anxious. Something has happened. Right? There's a situation in your life that's very difficult. And your response is, well, everything happens for a reason. That very first step, you bypassed it with this spiritual wisdom. And now you just keep telling yourself, everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. Okay, I'm not going to feel this way. No, I want you to feel anxious. I want you to feel anger. I want you to feel sadness. Just feel it. Don't do anything with it. Don't act out on it. Don't interpret it for now. Just feel it. And definitely don't saddle it and use like a band-aid to cover over it with something like everything happens for a reason or any other piece of spiritual wisdom because you stop the feeling. And then that feeling goes away, but it's not really gone. It's just been pushed aside. It's been repressed. It's going to come back later. Every time you have a situation that's similar to the one that's causing you some sort of anxiety or worry or anger, you're going to experience the same thing again. So that is the pitfall of negative emotions, of feeling a certain way and then using spirituality to avoid feeling bad. The second pitfall relates to positive emotions, which is that we love feeling connected. We love feeling bliss and joy and love, those beautiful emotions. And one of the things that I see very often in people on a spiritual path, people who've had an awakening moment, is you've lived a life where you haven't always felt like you belonged, or you have had difficulties with connection, and you feel like, now I'm finally getting to know myself. And you want to, as it's sometimes put, find your tribe. You want to go out in the world and make connections with like-minded people. And then what happens is that in that excitement, there's a tendency sometimes to very quickly attach and be very over the top in your proclamations of affection and love to other people on the path. And there's an aspirational side. You want to feel this way to everyone. You want to embody oneness. You want to feel that you see the divinity in everybody else and that you can feel that love and compassion for everyone. And so there's this very effusive quality that can sometimes take over, where you're declaring, I love you. You're such a light. I feel so connected to you, with people that you have not gotten to know very well. And this has happened to me numerous times in the past. People coming to me, I love you so much. You're so amazing. And there's nothing wrong with a proclamation of, I really just enjoy being in your energy. I love being with you. I'm so grateful for our connection. Thank you. But what I am describing is it's the spiritual version of what is psychologists now call love bombing or friend bombing. Very exuberant declarations of connection and affection and love. And then, however, the actual work of developing real intimacy, developing real knowledge of each other, becoming close friends, of being soul sisters and brothers, that work can be uncomfortable. It takes work to make friends. It takes work to keep relationships that where you develop a real sense of trust and intimacy, where you can share yourself and know that the other person holds that space for you and isn't going to share your intimacies with everybody else. To have that connection is something that often builds over time, and it builds through interactions. And you get to know each other and you share more and more of yourself. And what happens in this scenario is that, again, things can get uncomfortable. You can have misunderstandings. You can have differences of opinion. You might even have arguments. And if you are only interested in the proclamation of love, only interested in the effusive declaration that you get at the beginning, and you aren't willing to do that work, then you're going to pull away. And this is what happens. People withdraw and they get quiet and they're like, I was wrong. We aren't vibing on the same, we're not on the same wavelength. They're not part of my tribe. You might just even ghost. It's like, oh, this person turned out to be much more difficult. That is an attachment to the really strong positive emotions and simultaneously a running from the discomfort that always shows up at some point or another in a relationship. Inevitably. That's what relationships are for. They force us to look at ourselves. They trigger patterns in us. They bring up stuff within us. They mirror our stuff. And that is a healing process. We now get to meet that. Why did this person irk me? When they didn't call me back, why did it annoy me? If you're only going to stay at that surface level of love and then abandonment, then you're falling into a form of love bombing coupled with bypassing. You're not always going to be beaming and full of light, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so that's been the first step of letting go. Our emotions are not signs of failure. They are simply a measure of where we have felt separation and judgment in the past. Okay. So I hope that you have found this week's video helpful. In the next video, I'm going to dive into the next step in the process of being with our emotions. When do we come back to story? When do we come back to memory? And how do we work with the mental side of things once we've really felt this emotion? I'll see you soon.